Welcome to Keepers of the Word. You're here with Ron, Mike, and our special guest, Darrell Rivers, is back again. You might remember him from our episode that we did on the Civil War. Today, Darrell is going to talk about a whole new subject, starting with these awesome smoking hats, and I'm going to go ahead and change from Cowboy Jesus mode into the smoking cap guy.
Yes.
So that we're all wearing our cool smoking hats for this episode.
I'm Sir Blazington with this hat on.
Indeed.
That is my name that I was given today.
Your moniker?
Yes. And today we will be talking about Rudyard Kipling and the Man Who Would Be King. Since we have our historian here who's an expert on the subject, we would like to dive right into that story.
So first, thank you for having me back.
Thanks
I am
for being
still shaving, unfortunately. I had a Revolutionary War event, and then I had a 1940s event. Also, kind of eccentric if you have a beard. So I will get back into full Victorian mode, but today I look like a child.
Yeah, you have these awesome smoking hats.
Yeah,
Can you explain?
Well, to the general public, I am usually known as Lord Rivers. And this is these are my brand smoking caps. That I sell online. I have my Victorian clothing line, Victorian caps and accessories, and they can find them on lordrivers.com.
LordRivers.com.
Yes.
You could get these cool hats there.
Sir Blazington.
I'm Sir Blazington. And going back to Rudyard Kipling.
Yes, so Rudyard Kipling, this is, for those of you that haven't seen it, you got to watch The Man Who Would Be King.
Yes.
It is one of the great movies of my childhood and probably influenced me
Correct.
more than I know.
Me too, and I believe that's how we met. And we started
Yes.
talking about. I saw him wearing this pin, which is the insignia right there, and this stood out to me because I remember having a conversation with my father the first time we watched The Man Who Would Be King. I was very young; I was probably like 10 years old, and he told me, "Yeah, this movie is about Freemasons, and your grandfather was a Freemason." So ever since then, I've been interested in the craft and. When I saw that on him, I'm like, hey, that is the symbol from, and then we just started hitting it. We're like, hey, did we just become best friends?
Yes.
I got a cool smoking hat. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go for it.
I like to think of The Man Who Would Be King as like the Victorian national treasure. It's mostly fictional, and it lends a sense of mystery. It's Kipling turning what if into an adventure story. And so it's to give you the background, it's set during the British Raj, and that's where Kipling grew up. He grew up during the British colonial period where Britain ruled India. And in the first half of the 19th century, it's this weird nebulous control of India by the East India Company. In 1857, it's direct British rule that is known as the Raj. And so that's the world in which Kipling grew up in, is British administrators creating this class over in India, and simultaneously being separated from and interacting with all these different cultures. And so you see that writing in there. He even writes about the white man's burden, and you'd have to figure out for yourself whether he's defending or attacking imperialism. And the same thing with, he has a great poem called The Mother Lodge, which is all about how outside the lodge, it's sir, salute, salam, but inside the lodge, it's brother, and it don't do no harm. So he has this, talking about Freemasonry bridging that cultural divide. But just to give you the background, there's the British Raj, and then we're going to talk a lot about Kafiristan is in The Man Who Would Be King, and the backdrop is the Great Game, and the Great Game is this Cold War between Victorian Britain and Tsarist Russia. And it's Russia has control over the north part of Central Asia. Britain has control of India. And so there's this game back and forth over the lands in between. And those lands in between are the great unexplored parts of the world then. They're these, dangerous valleys and, high mountains, the Hindu Kush. And in the story, these two Masons, these two former British soldiers, frustrated with the Raj, that they can't get work in the Raj because they're not of a particular class, that they're kind of the deadbeats of society. And that's not really, excusing them, because they do they're known to have been some shady characters before, but they are Masons and they are former British Army soldiers. Decide they're going to go become kings in Kafiristan. They're going to just go off into the most exotic part of the world they can think of and try to take it over.
Because they know how to drill men.
Yes, because they know soldiery, and so they're going to use that to try to take over this part of Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan today. And it's still a dangerous remote part of the world.
Right.
But the Kipling story is, there's so many Masonic lessons in there. It's not only the great questions, but it's also like, what makes a good brother. And it's always stood out to me, not only because it had that mystery that kind of drew me towards Masonry, but it also feels like you can always get sucked into an adventure with a brother, and that can be good or bad, and you can end up dead at the end.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. But that's part of the adventure of life.
Correct.
And
The hero's journey.
yeah, and there's so many cool things to talk about with the man who would be king. So, did you have something you wanted to talk about first?
Well, let's talk about Kipling and his history. Where did he become a Mason? I know he was born in Bombay, and he became a Mason in India.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about the history
So
of that?
his family was very involved in Masonry. He grew up in India, and he has probably one of the worst initiation stories of anyone. He took the minutes to his own initiation. The lodge needed a secretary, and so they got special permission to initiate him. I believe he was 20, and they needed to be 21 or something like that. But they got permission for him to be initiated early in order to be the secretary. So he
Because
doesn't.
that never happens.
Oh, I know. But that's the part of his Masonic experience, and clearly he enjoyed Masonry and wrote a lot about Masonry, and it was a huge part of his life. But I can't imagine that was a very good beginning to Masonry. And I'm going to bring up this since we talked about it
You did
last
talk about
time.
Yeah.
it last time.
I am almost certain this was in the same room as Rudyard Kipling. So it's an 1865 Book of Constitutions, but it's stamped in 1890 by the District Grand Lodge of the Punjab. And here's another thing with British imperialism is different parts of India didn't get their own Grand Lodge for a time. They were part of district Grand Lodges, so these sub-Grand Lodges under the UGLE for a while. But this was stamped in 1890 in the District Grand Lodge of the Punjab, and that's the state in which Rudyard Kipling would have been the secretary of his lodge. And what do secretaries have to do? They have to bring stuff to the Grand Lodge, right? And so he would have had to go to the Grand Lodge of the Punjab. It's in the same building as Rudyard Kipling. Pretty exciting.
Yes, it is.
I'm very
A lot of history
excited.
there.
I don't know if everyone else is very excited, but
That is
it
some
was in
great
the
piece
same
of
room as
history.
Rudyard Kipling.
Let's go into the movie. If you talk about the movie, we're talking about two main characters, Michael Caine and Sean Connery. How did you feel that they did in those roles?
I think you couldn't have had
Any better.
anyone,
Right?
And they talk about that. You can go and look on YouTube some of the
Commentary,
interviews that it was almost made a decade earlier,
Wow.
and it was almost made with Clark Gable and like Humphrey Bogart doing English accents,
No.
and it would have been horrible.
Yes.
Yes.
Of course. I mean, you have Michael Caine's phenomenal, and then
Yeah.
Sean Connery.
And Billy Fish, you know, he was just great at and Shakira Kane. Michael Caine's wife is in there too. She's Roxana.
It's a great movie, and again, going into if you're a non-Mason watching the movie,
Yeah.
you're listening to the way they're talking to each other, and they're kind of testing each other during the movie in different times, in different parts of the movie, and you know, when you first watch it, you don't pay attention to those things, but later on, as I became a Mason and I saw it again, I'm like, oh. Hey,
Well, that's the best part. That's my.
That's where
I
I'm
love
like,
introducing
oh,
that to people.
exactly.
So he's in the train station, and the guy steals his pocket watch. So he takes out his pocket watch just like this, puts his arm around him, and manages to. I mean, you must have had to have been pretty good to be a Victorian pickpocket, but manages to fish this T-bar out, and gets it, and then he puts it in his hand. And he sees, I put it out front, that jewel, you know, in a watch fob, and recognizes he's a Mason and goes, damn. And then further on in the movie, he gets on the train with him, trying to put his watch back. And so that just, it tells you, and it's great to talk to people about it, that guy's a Mason too.
Yeah.
You know, and that doesn't mean that, you know, when you're a Mason, you're automatically a great person.
Right.
No.
But you're probably going to be a good person to other brothers.
Yes.
And so that's just another one of those great Masonic questions because he steals the watch and then he has this exchange with him, and it's this fake Masonic exchange. He says, you know, would you give it upon the square? You know, and all this for the sake of the widow's son. It goes all this, you know, semi-Masonic exchange, and then he ends up saying, "I missed my watch in the station at Lahore," you know, the station that he got on, and he was trying to blame the other guy in the train car, and then he says, "How was I to know you were a Mason?" So great.
Yes, that movie has a lot of Masonic reference, and I recommend it to any Mason. If you haven't seen it, you need to watch it. Not only are the actors good, but the story's really good.
Yeah.
And if we get into the story, we were talking about guys who want to go be kings somewhere.
Yeah.
And the way they find, I believe it's some type of lost tribe or something like that. And
Well, the plan is that they're gonna go talk to, because Rudyard Kipling is in the story,
right.
and he goes and they go and talk to Kipling and say, "Can we look at your maps?" And I like to. Everyone has a little bit of this Masonic experience. No, not everyone, but hopefully you don't have this too much. But there are times when brothers ask too much of you, you know, and so that's Rudyard Kipling putting whatever frustrations he has in there, because these guys show up and they're like, you know, we'll take 2 cigars apiece, and if a drink's being offered, we won't refuse one. And can we look at your maps, and we'll only be here till about midnight. Yeah, and so it's like, oh, okay, and there must have been so many, you know, of his own feelings in that. But yeah, they go off first into the Hindu Kush, into some of the most treacherous mountains in the world, and then they go into these valleys, which were some of the most contested valleys in the Great Game. You know, Kafiristan, up in the Wakhan Corridor. There's all kinds of these exotic places, but they. I also recommend you looking at reading the book part, because it's a short story, and they go more into where exactly they are, and there's a lot more Masonic reference in the book, because it's not just that they become kings. He also makes himself the Grand Master. And they forget most of the third degree, so they make it up.
Oh,
They decide they gather the headmen of the area after they've done some of their first conquering, and the grip goes back and forth, and there's some sort of recognition, and they say that they're entered apprentices, and then they check, and they're fellow crafts, and then they don't know the master mason, and so they're fellow crafts. We could make them master masons. And they don't remember any of their work, but they're just kind of making it up as they go along. And, it brings up those questions too about clandestine work, and at what point, are you going past your bounds? Because he's not only declaring that he's the king, he is the Grand Master of Kafiristan.
how did he get to Kafiristan, and how did he meet the folks there and determine through the symbolism?
In both story and book, they go through the mountains, and then they attack the first village, and they got these new rifles. They have the Martini Henry rifles, and they go defeat one tribe, and then they end up meeting the Gurkha, the Nepalese soldiers that work for the British Army, and a member of a former expedition that had an ill-fated expedition that he was the last member of. But they go and conquer one tribe, and then use that tribe to conquer another tribe. And in both book and story, they get to the part where they're both kings, and now comes the question of the pride before the fall.
The pride before the fall. In this symbol,
Yeah.
when they first saw it.
Now there's the adventure and
Yes.
the what if that Kipling puts in, that's fun, but clearly not academic. Clearly not. He says that is a symbol. Now they make the Master Masons in the short story, and in the movie he tries to prove that he's the son of Alexander the Great. And in both book and story, the high priest has this rock rolled back, and on it is that symbol, which was also on the watch fob that Kipling gave Dravit in the story. And so there's this connection. It's the eye and the square and compass. And so Kipling's saying, what if Masons have always been around? What if Alexander the Great was a Mason? What if Masonry is universal, and in ancient cultures it's around? And it's that national treasure sort of what if. He's not saying that it's real, but he's suggesting.
Once upon a time.
Yeah, once upon a time. So.
Is there anything else about this story that sticks out to you, or something that was funny in The Man Who Would Be King?
It's the funniest thing is just getting dragged along, because again, Dravit ends up dying. He ends up
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert! Oh my God! But if you didn't figure it out by now, I mean, if you make yourself the king, you're probably not going to come back from it. It's the fact that you get dragged along with your brothers on something like this, and it could be great, it could be not great. But Brother Carnahan makes it back and tells the story to Brother Kipling, and brings him in the head. It's just a little dried, shrunken head with the crown on it. And they did become kings, and he mentions in the short story that he's the Grand Master to Kipling.
He's the Grand Master.
Yeah.
And in the story, when they're talking about these things, I notice that they don't get into the actual ritual, but they're trying to talk about the developing the third. Mm-hmm. Right? How did you feel about that and the development of their third degree?
Well, what would you do if you had no connection to any Grand Lodge or inspector, and you didn't know the work, but you really wanted to impart light on someone? What would you do? Would you just do what you remembered? And that's what they did. They thought, this is it. We're out here. We're it. And so they're gonna make their own They're going to make do without permission because they
Easier
don't
to
need
ask.
permission to do anything.
Easier to ask
Yeah,
forgiveness
easier
than
to ask
permission.
for forgiveness. And that brings up a lot of your own Masonic questions and your own Masonic conduct. You know, if you have something that you really want to do you ask for forgiveness or permission? You know, and at what point do you become so frustrated with, you know, the obstacles that you encounter in trying to do Freemasonry as you interpret it? You know?
Yeah, that's a good way of looking
I'm
at
always bringing you these dark and bleak questions.
Hopefully
Hopefully
reality.
there's a more fun topic I bring one day.
But they're needed. You know, these are things that we need to talk about.
Yeah.
And I believe there's a lot of samples in The Man Who Would Be King of how not to be a Mason.
Yeah.
Right? Because like you said, he comes in and they impose it. And if you watch that scene's funny because you see these two guys, Sean Connery and Michael Caine, just walk into Rudyard Kipling office and they just grab the cigar and they start smoking it and they start, hey, well, we're going to look at your maps and you know and you know you're a brother, right? So you got to let me look at your maps and we're going to check it out. We're going to be kings and this is how we're going to do it and we kind of need your help. So help us. And he's put in a situation where like, okay, and I kind of feel like what you were saying earlier, kind of echoing that where he's kind of apprehensive, like,
Okay.
fine, let's do this.
Yeah.
And he sent them on their way, and that way got really
And right before he
crazy.
goes, he gives them his watch fob. Right before he
Right.
goes, he's like, please don't do this. This is really crazy. and right before he goes, he takes it off his watch fob and Dravid ends up wearing it as
his
a necklace.
Necklace, yeah.
But he's like, maybe Masonry will protect you. You know?
That's an interesting
Yeah.
part of the story. As far as Kipling's concerned, is there anything else aside from this story that kind of in his history as a Mason that stood out to you?
If you're interested in anything with India and the Raj or Kipling in general, there's 4 big things. There's the Mother Lodge. It's a great poem about his experience with that. I talked about that. King Solomon's Banquet is a little bit more about a table lodge. And it's another poem that he did. If is another one that
If
has
is my
Masonic
favorite.
significance.
Yes.
Yeah. And then Kim actually is an adventure story that has oblique Masonic references. Not as much as Man Who Would Be King, but it's the book that's about the Great Game and this orphan boy, Kim, who ends up getting involved in the Great Game between the Russians and Afghanistan and the British, and he actually grew up in a Masonic orphanage.
Oh,
So there's all these little connections there.
Aside from that, what interests you the most about this story, other than Masonry?
Other than Masonry, it's a very interesting time. The Great Game is, I think, one of the most interesting parts of history, because of how remote it is, how dangerous it was. If anyone's interested in the actual history of this, Peter Hopkirk's The Great Game is the seminal work on the Great Game, and there are, as fantastical as this story is, the real history is even more fantastical.
Really? Is there anything that you remember about that history that stood out to you?
There are, Englishmen that dress up as monks, going across in past Afghans and past Russians, secretly surveying parts of Afghanistan. There are, the most brutal tortures and executions stories from Russians getting captured or Englishmen getting captured or Afghans. It is, and it's so succinct that it's the Great Game because there's, it is this big chess game. Who's in control of Afghanistan? In the last half of the 19th century, it's a guy named Abdur Rahman Khan who works for the British on occasion, has an agreement with the British, and then for huge amounts of the 19th century, no one agrees where the borders are. And that kind of represents what we're talking about in that Kipling story, is when it's just kind of a nebulous gray, no one knows where it is on the map. That's kind of scary.
That's where you could just plant your flag. It's mine
Yeah,
now.
yeah, it might as well be mine if no one's gonna, if they're warring tribes that are going, no one knew how far east the Chinese were claiming. East Turkestan was contested, and the border between the Russians and the Chinese and the British and Afghanistan, it was all nebulous. And there's all these spies, and it's really an interesting field to get into.
And this is just a small little what if story.
Yeah, and this is that little
Could have
adventure
happened,
story.
yeah.
This is the cowboy story, but the great game. And,
Wow.
And that's why it's so important to me. This is actually my past master apron. And I talk all the time about being Kipling or being Dravitt sometimes. Sometimes I feel like the guy that's walking into the office and saying, well, I'll have two of your cigars apiece. There are things that will stand out to you as you might be doing. And, and you have to think about that too when you're in a position of relative power in the lodge. There's a point where Dravitt doesn't stand anymore in Peachy's presence. He's just the king. Well, I don't need to stand anymore. Well, maybe you need to bow when I walk by. And that is a big question when you're the
Yes.
master of a lodge. At
The
what
ego.
point? Yeah, are you the brother? Are you the master? That's a delicate balance.
And as we all know in our craft, and the master of the lodge runs the lodge.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it could be a good thing and it could be a bad thing. And the decisions you make as a master, kind of even a past master,
Yeah.
kind of can switch, pivot, and change the culture of a lodge.
Yeah.
And in this situation, you have Sean Connery, where he was, hey, we're brothers. Well, now I'm your king.
Yeah.
And you need to.
And the Grand Master.
And the Grand Master. So you just need to listen to me.
Yeah.
Because I'm your king. If you were to tell me that, I'd be like, shut your face. Get out of here.
We just went on this thing together,
Yeah.
and
now
now
you're
turned.
taking it too far.
Well, there's an important message there
Yeah.
for Masons even to this day, that the most important thing that we are amongst the brotherhood is brothers.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether we're officers in lodge, whether we're Grand Lodge officers, whether we're king.
On the
When we're
Yeah.
in the lodge, we're on the level, and we're all brothers, and we have to be able to
Yeah.
keep our cable toes accordingly.
I think for anybody who hasn't seen the movie or read the short story, it's a good adventure. I think there's a lot of stuff for you to take from it and apply it to your personal life. And you're looking at, again, the way you explained it in the beginning, these guys are actual Masons, but they're really not acting very Masonic.
Yeah.
And
So with this story and these guys in these power positions, did you take any of that into account and use lessons accordingly when you became master of your lodge?
I think so. I think it guided how I act with my senior warden and how I acted as senior warden. It always feels like I highly recommend, and I say this all the time in my own lodges, you got to be friends with your senior warden. He is your backup, your everything. And I was so close with my senior wardens. And I was very close with my master when I was senior warden. And I feel like you are those two guys.
And it's tough being master, because when you get over halfway
Yeah.
through the year, people aren't talking to you and asking
Yeah.
you questions anymore. They're at your senior warden's
Yeah.
side because they're making plans for the next year.
But
for whatever their next plan is.
if you click with your senior warden, night and day difference with how your year's going to go. And that's I can't say that enough. But I always imagine it as you're these just two goons that are just cobbling together the lodge as best you can, you know.
Yes, I think the harmony, the beehive of, it's very important to have the right folks around you doing all this, because it's either success or failure, right? And your year, it goes by like that. And like you said, having these great relationships in lodge with folks to get the work done is very important. That's why I feel like our lodge that we started, or we're starting, it's going to be hard work, but I know everybody's willing to put it in and
Absolutely.
do what they
And
need
do
to
the
do
work.
and get it done. No
Yeah.
complaining, let's just do it. And I think that type of militant attitude is necessary for you to accomplish these great things. We have a lot on our plate, but it's a labor of love. It's something we like doing. We love doing this. We love talking about these things. We love talking about Masonry. We love educating the public about Masonry. And please stop with those Illuminati shits, because I'm tired of it. I'm done. Like, fuck, done, please. It's over. And if you haven't figured it out, it's a scam. I'm sorry, I'm going on a rant, but damn, every day I get hit up by somebody wanting me to join or something.
Or wanting to join us
Yeah,
because they think
we're Illuminati.
Gonna
It's
make
like,
them rich.
You got all the answers.
What the hell? Should we make up our own degrees now?
I know. I know.
I mean, it's interesting, looking at things from these perspectives and seeing, working with teams of people who want to put in the work. You could accomplish great things. And in this story, they did accomplish their goals, but at the same time, it was their demise. And their demise was the ego. And the ego can destroy a lodge. We have seen it firsthand, right?
The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yes, it is. But at the same time, was it good for everybody or just yourself?
The
Great
last
story.
thing I want to talk about is Freemasonry in India in general. At the beginning, it really does have that elitist British context. But as the Raj progressed, you saw, especially military lodges, initiating more and more Indians, both Hindu and Muslim. And today, Masonry in India has a lot of those connotations, a lot of elitism. And you talk to different Indians about Freemasonry, India and Pakistan. Some of them feel like it has that connection with the Raj and with the elite class, and some people feel that it's now that the Grand Lodge of India is separate, that they're doing their own thing, and that it represents overcoming religious and cultural divides. So I'm no expert on Masonry in India, but I've had conversations about Freemasonry in India with people, and it starts with that goal of overcoming cultural and religious divides that you see in like the Mother Lodge.
I can tell you from my travels
Yeah.
that when I was in Europe and Eastern Europe,
Yeah.
that every time I did research on Masonry in the countries I was in, the overwhelming theme was always, it's complicated.
Oh, yeah.
And it's complicated because the history
Oh, yeah.
of Freemasonry and the history of those countries and everything
Yeah.
that all of them went through to get from where they were to where they are now.
What countries?
I was in Prague.
Okay.
And
Check.
then also I was in Hungary in Budapest. So, and then Vienna as well.
Yeah.
Austria.
Yeah.
All the history that I kept looking up was very similar. That it's complicated.
Yeah.
And sometimes
especially
it's more
in Catholic
secretive.
countries.
Yeah.
My experience with Freemasonry abroad is only Britain, Ireland, and Italy. And Italy is the most complex of them all. You can get into that. You could spend a whole episode on Freemasonry in Italy because
can imagine.
they have their mafia connection, they have their connection with Risorgimento,
the other
and
mafia
Garibaldi. Their George Washington was a Mason. Giuseppe Garibaldi was a Mason, and that represented kind of the breakaway from the old Bourbon monarchy and the church, and it is complicated. And the same thing in Ireland with a Catholic country, and the connection with Britain. It has its connotations. So I encourage people to look into Freemasonry in India, make your own conclusion, come to your own conclusions about what the Raj was and what Freemasonry and the Raj was. But most of all, read the story, watch the movie.
Yes.
It is quite the adventure story, and because Kipling had so many varied experiences with Masonry, you can tell there's so much of that written into the story.
Lots of overtones.
Yeah, so many little things that you can tell he's putting in there from his own experiences, and you gotta take those and have that, lead that to question what you do.
Awesome. I will take that and I will double down on it.
Indeed.
So where can people find you?
Lord Rivers on Instagram, lordrivers.com if you would like some obnoxious smoking
Cool
caps.
Smoking hats.
Yes. It
Sir
was
Blazington?
well, yeah, just a quick aside on the smoking
Cowboy
cap.
of Jesus.
They were mostly mid 19th century and they ended up all the way in the 20th century, but it's supposed to be a protection against smoke. And it's when you're sitting indoors smoking cigars in a room full of other guys smoking cigars, it's gonna get on everything. And so you have this robe. It goes over your nice clothes. You got this. It goes over your hair. It's gonna protect everything.
Yeah.
It's gonna be great.
I'm trying to get him to make me some special hats.
Yes.
But he doesn't want to. But it's okay. We're still working on it.
We're working him down.
We're gonna work on it. We're
Sir
gonna cut him
Blazington.
down. Yes.
He might be one of these gentlemen. Yes.
Yes. We want to thank the Long Beach Scottish Rite, and
Absolutely.
we want to thank our production team here, Lord Rivers, and I want to give a quick shout out to First Three Knocks at Refreshment, and all our brothers around LA that support us, especially North Hollywood Lodge. Thank you very much, and Ravens Rock. Other than that, you have anything to add, sir?
That's it. You did a whole bunch there. So,
Okay, I said a mouthful.
I'll just send them off from the northeast corner.
Peace.